What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and today we are here to talk about Beavis and Butthead, a show that you may not realize is actually one of the most important parts of modern music culture, especially when it comes to rock and metal. And of course, there are definitely other shows and people that deserve plenty of credit, for example, Headbangers Ball. But in my personal opinion, almost nothing did more to influence the direction of 90s rock and metal than Beavis and Butthead. In fact, it's very likely that some of the most iconic bands of that era, like Pantera, White Zombie, Tool, and Danzig, wouldn't be the legends that they are today without that show. So how did Beavis and Butthead become such an influential show? And what exactly was their contribution to the world of rock and metal? Those are the questions that I will answer in this video. But first, if you haven't, please check me out on Twitch. I'm streaming twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 4 to 7 p.m. Pacific, and there's a link to that in the description of this video. First, let's start at the very beginning. Beavis and Butthead's first appearance was back in 1992 in the form of two shorts on MTV's experimental animation show called Liquid Television. And as you can tell, these shorts are pretty crude, made by the show's creator Mike Judge using a secondhand camera that he bought with really rough, kind of bad audio. And they also didn't include the music video commentary segments that would go on to become the show's trademark. But still, if you watch them now, you can see the potential. MTV saw that as well, liked what they saw in those shorts, and signed Mike Judge to a 60-episode deal. And with that, the Beavis and Butthead show was born and debuted on MTV on March 8th, 1993. And aside from the overall production quality, like I said, the real key difference between the shorts and the MTV show was the addition of those music video commentary segments. Those of you who have seen the show know the format, but if you haven't, the way it works is that they would have these narrative segments where Beavis and Butthead would go on some sort of dumb adventure or get in some kind of trouble, like working at a drive-in restaurant or whatever. And then those narrative segments were cut in with Beavis and Butthead watching music videos and commenting on them in the same way as reaction channels do now on YouTube. If they liked the song, they said it was cool and got stoked.
Chains and chicks. That's more like it. Yeah. Flats are cool.
And if they didn't, they said, "This sucks, ha ha ha," and made fun of it.
That would be cool.
Yeah. They could kick him. And punch him too.
And it's interesting because you kind of get the sense that even though those music video segments are sort of now what we think of as being the primary part of the show, I don't think they were intended that way. It almost seems like they were filler. Like the show was intended to be a narrative cartoon, and they probably included the music video segments as a way to save money, because it's a lot cheaper to do those parts than to create the fully animated narrative segments. And because MTV was MTV, they were able to use that music video content, whereas any other channel probably couldn't have. And so even if it was done as filler content to save money, it actually ended up being a brilliant move, because what it did is it made the show cool. And what I mean by that is, in 1993, when people thought of cartoons, they still thought of cartoons as stuff for little kids designed to sell cereal and action figures. The idea of cartoons that were for adults or even for high school kids just wasn't really a thing. And so the real genius of bringing in music videos like that is that it actually made Beavis and Butthead way more than just a cartoon. It made the show into something that was really part of the larger conversation about pop culture. It made the show cool and relevant in a way that no other cartoon had been. It was really closer to magazines like Spin or Rolling Stone than it was to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or G.I. Joe. Rather than just a cartoon, it was more like a source of pop culture commentary that happened to be in the format of these animated characters. And I think one really important aspect of that, and why they got it so right, is that the show's creator Mike Judge is actually a pretty solid musician. He played bass for quite a few bands over the years, even recording on several albums. For example, this one from 1989. And so maybe because of his background as a musician, the show had a big emphasis on rock and metal from day one. As the most obvious example, The two main characters in the show were these teenage metalheads in AC/DC and Metallica shirts. And although the show was clearly a self-parody, where like the entire premise of a lot of the humor was about how dumb Beavis and Butthead were as kind of your typical brain-dead metalhead stoner kids, still there was clearly a lot of love and respect for the culture underneath all those jokes. So you watched the show and you were like, okay, these two are complete moron, like idiots, but actually they kind of have pretty great taste in music. And so with all of that in the background, something really interesting happened. First of all, the show became just a massive hit pretty much right out of the gate, to the point where within just a couple seasons, it was MTV's highest rated show. And remember, this was the early 90s when MTV was extremely relevant, but also when grunge and gangster rap were kind of the two coolest forms of music, and metal was in a little bit of a low point coming off the hair metal years. And so Beavis and Butthead actually became arguably the most important metal tastemakers of the 90s, who almost single-handedly made the genre relevant in a way that it hadn't been in years. Of course, you also have to give a huge shout out to people like Ricky Rackman on Headbangers Ball, but with all due respect to them, Beavis and Butthead was probably literally 100 times more popular than that. This show was absolutely huge. Literally everybody who was a teenager then at least watched it a little bit, whether they cared about metal or not. They had merch, they had video games, they eventually had a movie. This thing was a gigantic media property. And so the platform they had was unparalleled, getting bands like Type O Negative, Ministry, Carcass, Gwar, Morbid Angel, and tons more onto primetime MTV. Getting that stuff in front of tens of millions of eyeballs every single day. Something that could just never ever happen on any other channel or any other show. And as an example of the show's power to create stars, look what they did for White Zombie and then by extension, Rob Zombie. In 1992, White Zombie's major label debut, La Sexorcisto, had been out for a year, but essentially flopped. Until Beavis and Butthead came along and said that they rocked.
Yes! This guy is cool.
And that little mention on Beavis and Butthead was all that it took to change the band's trajectory almost overnight.
The key moment was Beavis and Butthead. They played one of our videos, and overnight it changed everything. I mean, we went from like selling, 500 records a week to 30,000 records a week. You went from being, playing tiny clubs to arenas.
Which was also the start of Rob Zombie's career. And as most of you probably know, he went on to sell over 5 million albums as a solo artist, directed quite a few successful movies like House of a Thousand Corpses, and continues to be one of the biggest names in metal, headlining festivals all the time. And Beavis and Butthead kickstarted all of that. But it wasn't just White Zombie by any means. Another great example is Pantera. In 1992, they were coming off of Vulgar Display of Power, which was definitely a big breakthrough album for them, but it wasn't exactly a hit. It peaked at number 44 on Billboard. But then Beavis and Butthead came along and showed them quite a bit of love as well.
Yes! These guys rock!
Including one of my favorite all-time bits from the show where they keep referring to Phil as Pantera.
Damn it, Pantera, this beer is warm! Get me another one!
And then in 1994, after getting all that exposure on Beavis and Butthead, Pantera released Far Beyond Driven, which debuted at number 1 on Billboard. Now, am I saying that that success was entirely because of Beavis and Butthead? No, not at all. Pantera were obviously rising stars who have been getting bigger and bigger and bigger every year, but I do think that the show played a non-trivial part. Danzig is another example. They were certainly a successful band before, but they really blew up in 1993 when Beavis and Butthead added Mother to the show.
These guys are pretty cool, but this lead singer looks like Patrick Swayze and he like...
Shut up, Beavis. These guys are cool.
That song ended up hitting number 17 on Billboard, which was a massive, massive hit for a band of that size. And it remains their most popular song to this day. Also Tool, who also got quite a bit of love on Beavis and Butthead before putting out Anima in 1996, which was their big commercial breakthrough and I think really put them on the path to be the juggernaut that they are now.
Check it out, Butthead. A slot.
Yeah. Your mother's a slot.
And even for smaller bands like Crowbar, this show made a huge difference in their career. There's almost not a show that I'm at, barely a day goes by that someone else won't come up to me and say, man, I remember y'all all the way back from Beavis and Butthead. A lot of people also point to the 90s as kind of the golden age of death metal, and I would agree with them on that. And again, Beavis and Butthead played a big role in that. Maybe the biggest example of that as a song that became kind of a mini hit because of Beavis and Butthead was Morbid Angel's song God of Emptiness. As well as Napalm Death, Entombed, and Cannibal Corpse. And is it a coincidence that those were by far the most successful death metal bands? And that this was the commercial peak of death metal in general? I don't think it was. They also did a lot for hardcore, putting on great bands like Quicksand, Sick of It All, Life of Agony, and Biohazard.
Tattoos are cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna get one. I'm gonna be cool.
You could have "I'm a wuss" tattooed across your butt.
And I could keep going on and on and on, but the point is that the 90s were an amazing time for metal. And I think we have to give Beavis and Butthead a lot of the credit for that by giving the genre such a massive mainstream platform. And it wasn't just new stuff. They also gave a surprising amount of attention to older, kind of classic metal bands as well. For example, Judas Priest.
Breaking the law, breaking the law, breaking the law, breaking the law.
Along with Scorpions, Kiss, Motorhead, and my personal favorite, their roasting of King Diamond.
I think it's probably not their fault that they suck so much.
Yeah, it is.
And just to give you an idea of exactly how influential this show was, they also had the power to destroy or at least badly hurt careers. For example, Winger. Winger were a hair metal band that had a couple pretty big hits in the 80s. The biggest one, I think, being 17, which, yes, is about falling in love with a 17-year-old. And not only did they roast that song in an episode,
These guys live on the edge.
Yeah. The edge of Wolf Cliff.
but they took it even further. In season 2, they introduced a character named Stewart, who was kind of like their version of Butters, although obviously before Butters existed, meaning an annoying try-hard kid who lives down the street from them and is always trying to be friends with them, only to get mocked and bullied by Beavis and Butthead.
Hi, guys. You're back just in time for Full House. That Uncle Joey's funny, huh?
This sucks.
Yeah. We should have kidnapped someone cool.
And one thing you'll notice is that Stewart always wears a Winger shirt as compared to their AC/DC and Metallica shirts. Basically saying that AC/DC and Metallica are for the cool kids, and that Winger is a lame, uncool band for annoying little kids like Stewart. And although I don't think that Mike Judge had any intention of like seriously hurting Winger's career with that, I think he was just making jokes, it actually did have a substantial negative impact on them. Like, what kid is going to admit to listening to Winger, much less wearing their shirts, when the most popular show on TV is talking about them like that? Here's how Winger's frontman Kip Winger put it. There was nothing you could do but take it like a man. It certainly didn't help us, I'll tell you that. But it was a funny show and Mike's a funny guy. And the show did have a pretty good amount of pop and rap songs on it as well. But it was mostly just corny stuff like New Kids on the Block, Milli Vanilli, or Shaq that was pretty much just there to be mocked. And so if you look at a list of the episodes and what songs they had on there, the vast majority of it was rock and metal, and most of it was actually pretty damn good. But all good things must come to an end, and the show's main run ended in 1996, and after switching to a shorter format in 1997, they effectively ended the show aside from a weird comeback season in 2011. And it's a really rare example of a show where pretty much everybody who watched it agrees that it was great. Like, you're not going to find too many people that think Beavis and Butthead sucked, which is especially impressive considering that they made over 200 episodes of the show without ever running it into the ground. With that said, the show did have its fair share of critics in the media who honestly I think just didn't get it. I don't know if they didn't watch it or if they were just too old and out of touch to understand it, but either way, they seem to just badly miss the point of the show.
Beavis and Butthead, a popular cartoon series on the cable network MTV, came under fire this week. Previously, critics had railed against the duo as crude, dumb, ugly, thoughtless, sexist, self-destructive, and foolish.
Like, yes, Beavis and Butthead are rude, sexist idiots. That was the entire point of the show. I thought that was pretty obvious, to the point where, if anything, it was almost like a mockery of your typical dumbass metalhead. And so the final question is, what exactly is Beavis and Butthead's legacy and lasting impact? And this is almost like a whole other video in itself, because I would argue that the show was pretty damn influential. Because aside from the impact that it had on the rise of all the bands that I mentioned and many more, it was also the start of Mike Judge's career. He would go on to create a lot of stuff, probably most notably King of the Hill, which was also an incredible and very successful show. A lot of the characters on that show, like Hank Hill, kind of had their origins in Beavis and Butthead. And it also laid the blueprint for a whole section of YouTube, which is reaction videos. He also wrote and directed quite a few movies, for example, Office Space and Idiocracy, which are both certified classics that are very influential in their own right. And one of my personal favorite shows of all time, Silicon Valley, which, as somebody who worked for a Silicon Valley tech company at the time that show was on the air, I can say is just an insanely accurate parody of tech culture. And beyond that, the show essentially created the entire category of cartoons for adults. It laid the foundation for South Park, Family Guy, Adventure Time, Rick and Morty, and maybe more than anything else, Metalocalypse. All of which were huge pop culture phenomena that I could make entire videos about themselves. And as I'm writing this, the new Beavis and Butthead movie is actually coming out in a few weeks. So although the show has been gone for a while, I have a feeling that it is going to continue to be relevant for many, many years to come. All right, my friends, that does it for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. I also want to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. Patrons get all my podcasts a week early. I do giveaways and some other stuff. And if you want me to review your music or artwork or anything else, there's also a way to do that. Every month I do a call for submissions. If you want me to review it live on Twitch, just drop a link in the comments of that post. Then I will review them live on Twitch and post them on Patreon for everyone to see. So if that sounds cool to you, hit the link in the description of this video. And with that, I'm going to sign out for now, but I will see you next time.